Food is supposed to make us healthy, remain free of chronic diseases.
Food is supposed to support your health and life.
Food is supposed to give us the building blocks needed to build and repair the human body and the energy needed to do those processes. The reality today is that food is mostly harming us.
90% of the footprint of a supermarket is filled with what Michael Pollan once called food-like substances. They're not food.
No matter what chronic disease you look at, we've seen them rise from being very uncommon or extremely rare even or unknown to the most common diseases that even children are aware of.
We have food guidelines from the United States government. We have all of these things telling us how to eat, how to live our lives, how to exercise, and our health has done nothing but get worse.
So our public health system really is a disaster. They've done things like vilify saturated fat, vilify cholesterol, and confuse the whole subject.
We now live with so much sickness all around us that we can't even imagine what it feels like to live in a healthy society.
Over a 20-year span, no increase in calories, moderate increase in exercise, and yet obesity rates went from 30% to 42%. That should sound the alarm bells for us. We're doing something wrong.
So there has to be something else in the environment.
What we're being told to eat is at the heart of our problem.
You may have seen this anti-smoking ad before.
This is part of an aorta, the main artery from the heart. Smoking makes artery walls sticky and collect dangerous fatty deposits. This much was found stuck to the aorta wall of a smoker, age 32.
Until recently, we tended to blame this disease on the fat and cholesterol within our diet. This is known as the lipid hypothesis. Simplistically, eating fat causes our LDL level to rise, which then blocks our arteries. And unfortunately, when President Eisenhower had his heart attack in 1955, this was the reasoning wheeled out by the most vocal and influential scientists of the time. This put the lipid hypothesis on track to haunt us for generations to come.
Ja, det jeg skal fortælle om i dag, det er det der står deroppe, kolesterolhypotesen. Det er simpelthen en af de største medicinske skandaler i moderne tid. Og det er ikke noget, jeg bare påstår ud i det blå. Jeg har faktisk studeret det her i mere end 20 år og publiceret mere end 100 videnskabelige artikler i de største skandinaviske og internationale tidsskrifter. Så jeg er ingen nybegynder. Jeg ved, hvad jeg snakker om.
The reason that meat and cheese and dairy were condemned is because they contain saturated fats. The idea was saturated fats cause your cholesterol to go up. First it was total cholesterol, then LDL cholesterol, and that would clog your arteries and lead to a heart attack. It turns out that whole chain of events it's not what we understood it to be true. In numerous clinical trials that have been analyzed, reanalyzed since they were originally done, it just turns out that people with a higher saturated fat diet do not have a higher rate of heart attacks in the end.
So how do you suppose we got this so wrong? And this is obviously, as you know, pretty prevalent thinking in the medical and nutrition communities.
Saturated fat has been the dietary culprit of the past 50, 60 years. And it really goes back to the 1950s when America was in the throes of the heart disease epidemic, which had risen out of nowhere to become the nation's #1 killer. President Eisenhower himself had a heart attack in 1955. One of the ideas about what caused heart disease was proposed by one scientist named Ansel Keys who said that it was saturated fats. There were other ideas at the time, but Ansel Keys got that idea implanted into the American Heart Association, the nutritional guidelines of the American Heart Association in 1961, and it's like the rest is really history from there. It had never been tested, but when it became our dietary guidelines, it had never been tested.
The idea that fat and cholesterol cause heart disease comes from 1952 from the diet-heart hypothesis. This hypothesis has been called the greatest scientific deception of this century, perhaps of any century, by a renowned American doctor and scientist, George Mann, who passed away already, and by many other renowned scientists who really understood science, how it's conducted, and how we should analyze it. A hypothesis is not the truth. It's only an idea. It has to be proven. This hypothesis, since it was proposed, no other hypothesis in the world had so much research put into it. Billions have been spent all over the world to prove this hypothesis. Billions. To prove a hypothesis takes a long time. Science doesn't work fast. And while science was working on this hypothesis, the governments in the Western world have fully committed to it. The media touted a new breakthrough, that this is the truth. And all sorts of commercial companies jumped on the bandwagon. Pharmaceutical industry is making billions on this hypothesis. Food industry is making billions. Medical industry is making billions. Western governments are making billions. This hypothesis today we can 100% say has been proven wrong. The diet-heart hypothesis is a big mistake. It has been proven wrong for the last 30 years. But because our political and commercial machine has committed to this hypothesis, they work very hard not to allow the population to know the truth, to know the real scientific truth that came out.
Jeg sier ikke det riktig, men jeg sier at vi er bare mennesker, vi som er forskere også. Har vi sagt noe og liksom fått hele befolkningen til å sky det mette fettet, og så plutselig så for så det de siste 30 år, det var feil, så kan bare spise, altså litt pinlig. Så at det jo alltid vanskelig å innrømme at man har tatt feil.
Den, der har hele sin videnskabelige karriere baseret på kolesterolhypotesen og har prikket det her i mange år og blevet professor, han er meget svært ved at stille sig op og sige, at jeg tog fejl. Fordi hvis det nu er forkert, jamen så er al hans eller hendes videnskabelige produktion, det er jo bortglemt. Ja, det er værdiløst. Det skal der meget til. Der skal stærk karakter for at gå op og sige sådan noget. Men så er der en anden faktor, og det har vist sig nemlig, at de eksperter, som WHO bruger til at skrive de her kostråd, der er mange, der er aflønnet af fødemiddelindustrien. Der er en organisation, som hedder ILSI, som under dække af at være videnskabelig sammenslutning, i virkeligheden er betalt af margarineindustrien og olieindustrien. Og de har en masse af sine folk ansat på WHO. ILSI, ILSI, International Life Science Institute.
So in 2020, the panel of there was an investigation, kind of a report done on the conflicts of interest of the people who developed the guidelines, and 95% of the panelists, the people that developed these guidelines in 2020, 95% of them had ties to the food industry. 95%. So and these are industries that, again, produce tons of corn, tons of soybean, and have plenty to gain from by dietary guidelines that are high in carbs, and have plenty to lose if we were to say something radical like, carbs are not nearly, we don't need to eat them at all, perhaps, and maybe we can have some more beef. That would be a big upset.
Det er en figur, som viser sammenhængen mellem, hvor meget fedt man spiser i forskellige lande, og hvor mange der dør af hjerteinfarkt i samme lande. Og I kan se her, at i Japan, der spiser man meget lidt fedt. Og i USA, der spiser man meget. Og i Japan, der har man en meget lav hjertedødelighed. I USA er den vældig høj. Flot bevis, ikke? Alle klappede i hænderne, da han publicerede det her, og han blev citeret i Lancet, det er verdens største videnskabelige tidsskrift. Og nu ved vi, hvorfor vi får hjerteinfarkt. Det var bare et problem, som 2 amerikanske statistikere opdagede et par år senere, at Ansel Keys, han havde som sædvanligt snydt. Han havde nemlig bare taget data fra. Det viser sig nemlig, nu laver jeg først hans første tegning, den ser sådan her ud. Ja, vældig flot, kraftig, fin sammenhæng. Men de kiggede efter i FAO's og WHO's arkiver, og så opdagede de, at han havde bare taget med data fra de her 6 lande. På det tidspunkt var der data fra 22 forskellige lande. Og når man tog alle de her med, jamen der så det helt anderledes ud, fordi der lå det nærmest sådan her. Så hvad Keys havde gjort, han havde bare valgt 6 ud, som passede vældig fint med hans hypotese, og glemt de andre. Det er moderne videnskab.
En av disse studiene som var på en måte med på å etablere denne kolesterolhypotesen da for veldig mange år siden, en studie som ble kalt for The 7 Countries Study, som har blitt veldig kritisert i etterkant fordi at den utelot jo datamateriale som ikke passet med hypotesen. så den var jo veldig viktig for å etablere denne hypotesen, og så har denne hypotesen bare blitt akseptert, og da er det nok som Lars Magne sier at det var jo, den har jo industrien trykket til sitt bryst, for denne kan jo vi bruke. Ikke sant? Denne kan vi bruke til å markedsføre og argumentere for våre produkter. Og så har på en måte metafett og det som blir kalt for fjøsfett og sånn, ikke sant? Blitt pekt ut som den store syndebukken, og så er det egentlig ikke noe som helst slags god evidens for at det forårsaker noe hjerte- og karsykdom i det hele tatt.
Når man spørger autoriteterne, i hvert fald i Sverige, det hedder Livsmedelsverket, hvad de bygger deres råd på, jamen, så siger de, jamen, der findes tusindvis af studier, der har bevist, at mættet fedt er farligt, og vi stoler på de internationale eksperter i WHO og FAO, og gik man ind i deres råd 2003, så står der ganske rigtigt, at sammenhængen mellem mættet fedt og hjerte-karsygdom, særligt med hjerteinfarkt, det er blevet indgående studeret med stærke og kraftige associationer fra en stor mængde studier. Når man så går ind og læser den her rapport og ser, hvad er det, de bygger det på, jamen, der er altså en mængde studier, der påstår, at mættet fedt hæver kolesteroltallet. Og så er der en studie, som viser, at kvinder, der spiser meget mættet fedt, de har større risiko for at få hjerteinfarkt. Det er deres samlede bevisbyrde. Og går man ind i den sidste studie, så viser det sig, at ja, det står ganske vist sådan i sammenfatningen, abstrakte, som man hedder. Men går man ind i tabellerne, så ser man, at jamen, det stemmer ikke. Fordi det er lidt statistisk fiksfakseri. Hvis man korrigerer for andre faktorer, så forsvinder den her sammenhæng. Der er ingen, der har kunnet vise, at man bliver mere syg af at spise mættet fedt. Men det har ændret sig nu. Sidste år kom der en ny rapport, og der står noget helt andet. Der står, at den tilgængelige kundskab er utilfredsstillende, og man kan ikke stole på den til at bedømme effekterne af mættet fedt på risikoen for hjerteinfarkt. Nu det her er en jeg tror den er på 300 sider, den her rapport, og det her det er altså skjult inde i en af rapporterne, så man skal læse længe før man finder det her, og de prøver på alle mulige måder at bortforklare det her, men det er et faktum, de har ikke kunnet vise nogen videnskabelige studier, der beviser, at mættet fedt er farligt. Men de fortsætter med at sige, at vi skal mindske på det mættede fedt.
As you already heard, 95%, maybe more, of studies in the Western world are funded by commercial companies. In English, we have a very good saying. You know, in Russia, we have another, which is very good. But it says that the one who pays the piper orders the tune. Right? And What is a scientific study? They design it, they collect data, and then the data is analyzed. If any of you studied statistics, how to analyze data, you would know that there are many methods to analyze the data, depending on what result you want to get out of it. Pharmaceutical industry, food industry, and other industries which benefit from this employ an army of statisticians to do just that for them. So all of these studies, 95, almost 100% studies on this subject, we cannot trust. They're full of lies. However, the honest science has been working on it. There are honest scientists in every country around the world, and they have come up with the truth. So what did the honest science actually say? That dietary cholesterol and animal fats have nothing to do with heart disease. They do not cause heart disease. In fact, there is no connection.
Nordens, kanskje Europas mest fremtredende ernæringsforsker, Arne Astrup, professor på Københavns universitet, som nå nettopp har skrevet en oversiktsartikkel der han på en måte konkluderer med at det var feil, og advarer mot matvarer med mye mettet fett.
Vi har jo fått høre at det var farlig å spise mer enn ett egg i uken, for da fikk vi for mye kolesterol i oss. Det har jo vist seg at det man trodde da var feil.
Ja.
Og til og med de amerikanske retningslinjene for diet guidelines har gått vekk fra å si og advare mot å spise egg, og advare mot et høyt inntak av kolesterol, fordi det er ikke noen sammenheng mellom et høyt inntak av kolesterol eller inntak av egg og utvikling av hjerte- og karsykdom.
Over the last 10 or 15 years, a Swedish doctor named Uffe Ravenskov has gone through the literature and shown just beautifully that there is no connection between atherosclerosis, heart disease, and the triglycerides and cholesterol in the blood. They are associated, but it isn't causal. The cholesterol seems to be there as a defensive reaction to protect the injured blood vessels.
Der findes en undersøgelse fra Indien også, som aldrig nævnes. Det var en indisk forsker, som fulgte alle de ansatte ved jernbanesystemet i Indien i 6 år, og så talte han sammen, hvor mange der døde af hjerteinfarkt i forskellige distrikter, og så sammenlignede han det med den sædvanlige kost i de her forskellige distrikter. Den afviger nemlig vældig kraftigt. Og han kom frem til, at der var flest, der døde af hjerteinfarkt i Madras, og der var færrest i Punjab. Men nu vil sige, at Madras, der lever man næsten rent vegetarisk. Der spiser man næsten ikke noget mættet fedt. Mens i Punjab, der fråser man i mættet fedt. I virkeligheden, de spiste 16-17 gange mere fedt i Punjab, end de gjorde i Madras. Men altså trods det, så var der hjertedøden i Madras, den var 7 gange større. Og det var til og med sådan, at dem, der døde af hjerteinfarkt i Madras, de var i gennemsnit 12 år yngre end i Punjab. Er der igen et vældig smukt bevis på, at det mættede fedt har ingen betydning for hjerteinfarkt.
Saturated fat, which is the form of fat that we find in animal protein in the fat, the animal product fat. So tallow from beef, lard from pigs, butter from dairy, etc. We know that that's nowhere near as bad as we kind of have always made it out to be. We know it's not as simple as if you eat that, bacon and eggs, that's a heart attack, on a plate. We know that's not the case anymore.
People who eat the most fat and the most cholesterol have the lowest incidence of disease, all disease. The higher your cholesterol level in your blood, the healthier you are altogether. That's what science has demonstrated conclusively. That old people who have high levels of cholesterol have 100% here, no dementia, no Alzheimer's disease. They're healthy, they're sprightly, and they look after themselves, these people.
Now these are
data for millions and millions of South Africans whose lives are insured. And I can tell you Old Mutual better know whether they are properly adjusting the risk for their patients, for the people who are insured with them. And what they show, these are the 5 groups of different ages, 25, 35, 45, 55, 56. And these are the cholesterol levels. That's below 5, that's 5 to 7.5, and that's above 7.5. And you can see that with one exception, and that's only in this group here, having a cholesterol above 7.5 is of no predictive value whatsoever. And in fact, as you get older, which is exactly is compatible with the world literature, that having a cholesterol above 7.5 actually helps you if you're above 56.
High blood cholesterol does not cause heart disease or atherosclerosis. That is a fact. We've known this fact for the last 20 years. Yet the population is still being told the lies. Let's talk about low blood cholesterol. It increases risk of heart disease and stroke. That is a fact. If you have low blood cholesterol, you will have high risk of heart disease and strokes. That is an absolute fact.
For nogle få måneder siden, der kom der en meget interessant studie fra USA. De målte kolesteroltal på dem, der kom ind på sygehuset med akut hjerteinfarkt. Tog det første døgn. Og det var en studie, som omfattede 140.000 akutte hjerteinfarkter fra hele USA. Og det viste sig, at gennemsnitsværdien hos dem med akut hjerteinfarkt var lavere end normalt. Tyk lidt på den. Det var lavere end normalt.
It is associated with cancer. People who have low blood cholesterol have it low for about 18 years before they're usually diagnosed with cancer. That is the number that's been given to us by science. It is associated with violence, aggression, and suicide. We'll talk more about the brain, but what you have to understand, the brain is a fatty organ. It's got a high fat content, the brain. About 40% of that fat is cholesterol. Your brain is made from cholesterol, 40% of it. The substance called myelin coats every nerve fiber and every nerve cell in your nervous system, in your brain, in your spine, in the peripheral nervous system. It's like an insulation around electric wires. You know that electricity, all electric wires have to be insulated? Our brain works on electricity. So that's the insulation. Myelin, more than 60% of it is cholesterol. The rest is saturated fat. That is what myelin is. So when you start reducing blood cholesterol levels, you're putting brain under grave danger. Because brain has cell regeneration processes going on all the time. Cells in the brain do die, and they get replaced by newly born cells. These processes are very active. And these new baby cells need building materials to be made from. They have to be made from cholesterol, saturated fats, proteins, glyconutrients, and some other things, but a large percent is fat and cholesterol. And if the blood cholesterol is low, the brain is not getting enough to maintain its structure and to function properly.
Hjernen kan ikke fungere uden kolesterol. Ikke nok med, at hele hjernen er det mest kolesterolrige organ, men hjerneimpulserne kan ikke fungere, hvis der ikke stadigvæk sker en produktion af kolesterol inde i hjernen.
So I lived in Boston for 10 years, and I did 3 years of full-time Alzheimer's research during that time. I used to go to the morgue every Thursday and do brain cuttings on humans and work with human brain tissue. You can find lots of evidence that lower naturally occurring total cholesterol levels are associated with poorer brain performance. There are plenty of studies that show high cholesterol later in life is associated with decreased dementia risk. High cholesterol decreases dementia naturally.
It's been known for 80 or 90 years that cholesterol is an antitoxin, anti-inflammatory, our basic protective substance. the cholesterol rises as there is a problem to be soothed. And when the tissues are less efficient, they need more blood supply. So the blood pressure and the cholesterol tend to rise with aging as the tissues need more care and attention. There was a Framingham study, I think it was about 20 years ago, which looked at the cholesterol level of people as they passed the age of 50 in ordinary life situations. And they saw that those who did not have above a 200 milligram cholesterol level were more likely to become demented.
It is associated with memory loss. In fact, memory loss is the #1 side effect of statin drugs. Because in order to form memories in the brain, synapses have to be formed. The cells in the brain have long arms. They grow long arms to communicate with each other. And when the two arms of two cells come together, they have to do this. They have to create a synapse here and a synapse here, and they have to connect. Now, the synapses are almost exclusively made out of cholesterol and saturated fat. If your blood cholesterol is low, that is the only place your brain can get cholesterol from. It can manufacture some, but not enough. Then the brain can't form these synapses. So the cells cannot connect with each other. As a result, the person cannot create memories. And it is the short-term memory that suffers. The person might remember what happened in the childhood, because those synapses were formed in the childhood, but he doesn't remember what he had for breakfast, and where he put his car keys, or where he left his hat, or his shoes, or something else. The short-term memory is not being formed, because the brain doesn't have enough building materials, resources to create memories. These people can't learn anything new, because in order to learn something, we have to remember it. We can't form memory. We have an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. Western governments are in absolute panic because it is a terrible epidemic and it's like an avalanche coming onto humanity. Alzheimer's disease, dementia. Vast percent of that epidemic is due to statins because every one of these people are taking these drugs. The brain is starving. It cannot form synapses. As a result, the person cannot learn anything, cannot remember anything, and develops Alzheimer's disease.
In the studies of people that have been studied for like decades with their cholesterol levels and their disease and all that, people as they age, people with very low cholesterol levels do more poorly on cognitive testing. So when you test their brain function and their memory and all that, they do worse if they have very low cholesterol levels. Okay. So it's not benign. It's not like high is terrible and the lower the better. Yeah. You know, that's one thing. There was an interesting little finding out of, I think, 6 of these big studies that were done in the late 1900s, noticing that people who had very low cholesterol levels were twice as likely to die either from suicide or from some kind of violent death. Wow. Which is very interesting. Yeah. And the thought behind that is, so our brains are 70% fat. They use a ton of cholesterol all day to function properly. So they actually need cholesterol to be, available to them. So you can't just drop your cholesterol as low as possible. Your brain is going to suffer from that.
In a big study of violence, they divided populations into those with at least 180 cholesterol and those below 180. And the violent offenders were clearly connected with the below 180 cholesterol levels.
Carl Pfeiffer, a renowned American doctor who did research in American prisons, has discovered that more than 80% of violent offenders, people who committed murder and other violent crimes, had low blood cholesterol. More than 85%. Low blood cholesterol makes the brain starve. The brain cannot function well. The person becomes angry. These people are easily irritated. They easily attack. They easily become aggressive. And they are prone to violence and crime.
What is the evidence that high LDL will kill you. This systematic review answered that question. 19 prospective cohort studies with over 68,000 participants were reviewed, and the overwhelming finding was that individuals with the highest LDL levels lived the longest. In fact, 16 of the 19 studies found this relationship. The higher the LDL level, the lower the chance of death. Comparing the very highest LDL group with the lowest, or just the second lowest, high LDL levels came out on top. Even when study subjects with terminal diseases, heart disease, diabetes were excluded, the results stayed the same. This study found about a 50% reduction in the chance of death in the highest LDL group compared to the lowest. In a nutshell, the findings of this systematic review are robust, and dismissing or ignoring them is scientific fraud.
I'm just going to show you another paper which was published about 2 or 3 years ago, which is not industry funded. This study is completely independent, and these scientists have no link to the cholesterol hypothesis, so they can write and publish what they like, and it's very important. If you've dedicated your life to believing that cholesterol causes heart disease, it's very difficult for you to come along and say, well, actually it doesn't, and here are the findings that disprove it. So the conclusion from this study is that cholesterol above 5.5 doesn't add anything to predictive risk. So we found total cholesterol to be an overestimated risk factor. Our results contradict the guidelines well-established demarcation line of 5 millimoles per litre between a good and too high good levels of cholesterol. They also contradict the popularized idea of a positive linear relationship between cholesterol and fatal heart disease, which is what we taught, which was what Goldstein and Brown said. The more cholesterol, the more heart attack. Doesn't show it. So that's an independent study showing that.
It is associated with poor immunity because our immune cells are high-fat cells. Large percent of the cell membrane and the membranes inside the cell, which form organelles, are made out of cholesterol and saturated fat. And immune cells live a very short life, only a few days, many of them. And when there is any infection in the body, there's a fight going on, many of them die. So your bone marrow has to work very hard to give birth to new baby cells, immune cells, because all your immune cells are born in the bone marrow. Bone marrow is a high cholesterol organ. It has a very high composition of cholesterol. And again, most of that cholesterol comes to your bone marrow from the blood. If you have a low level of cholesterol in your blood, your bone marrow is starving. It cannot manufacture immune cells, blood cells, and many other cells.
It turns out that low cholesterol makes you susceptible to developing cancer. There was a Hungarian study about 45 years ago that found that when they chemically lowered the cholesterol, the mortality increased from all causes: accidents, homicides, suicide, and cancer. A huge increase in cancer mortality as they chemically lowered the blood cholesterol.
Det slik at den siste undersøkelsen meg bekjent som er gjort i Norge, helseundersøkelsen i Nord-Trøndelag, der det slik at de som har lavest, altså de som har høyest dødelighet, for å si det slik, det de som har kolesterol under 5.
Så vi skal være fornøyd, vi som er over 5?
Ja, du skal bare, og for kvinner så det slik at det avtar, dødeligheten for å si det slik, avtar jo høyere kolesterolnivåer. Slik at de som har...
Du er sikker på dette, det høres jo...
ja. Men altså, da får du bare konfrontere disse forskerne ved NTNU som har publisert denne artikkelen.
Ja.
Men den blir jo... la oss si det sånn, våre helsemyndigheter har ikke lyst til å snakke om den artikkelen.
Altså, hvis du er kvinne, så bør du ha høyere...
Så det statistisk bedre å ha et kolesterolnivå over 7. Da har du lavere dødelighet.
We decided to do a systematic review of observational data looking at people over 60. So we looked at, was there first of all any association, if you're over 60, with LDL cholesterol and heart disease? Right? We found none. Okay, interesting. But what was surprising was there was an inverse association with LDL cholesterol and all-cause mortality. In other words, statistically, if you're over 60, the higher LDL, the less likely you are to die. So what's the reasoning for that? Well, something that's been forgotten or missed or not discussed. Cholesterol has a very vital role in many functions in the body, including the brain, hormone production, but also the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's likely that that's where the protective benefit comes, because older people are more vulnerable to dying from infections.
Yeah.
And we also know there is an association, I'll use this word, an association, right? Can't say it's definitely causal, between low cholesterol and cancer. Again, it's probably related to the immune system.
Yeah.
It is associated with early death. People with low blood cholesterol don't live long. They die early, usually from cancer or from an infection. People with low blood cholesterol have 4 times higher rate of AIDS than people with high blood cholesterol. That's a fact. People with low blood cholesterol suffer from infections 3 times more, and they die from infections much more often than people with normal and high level of cholesterol. We cannot fight infections without cholesterol. What does cholesterol do in the body? Let's have a look. It is a vital part of every cell membrane. You know that cell membrane is a double layer of fats, with the fat-soluble ends inside of the membrane and the water-soluble on the outside.
The cholesterol is everywhere in the cell. It's stuck to the chromosomes, the structural, architectural microtubules and microfilaments all through the cell. Even the genetic apparatus. Cholesterol is an essential component of every living process.
In some cells, depending the function of the cell in the body, depending on where this cell is in the body, some of them have 70% cholesterol in their cell membrane, some have 30. So there's a range between 30 and 70% of cholesterol in the cell membranes in the body. Every cell, about 70% of every cell are membranes. So you can do the calculations yourself. What percent of your body is actually cholesterol and saturated fat? It is more than 50%. You are made from cholesterol. It is a structural element of every cell in your body. And because the cells in the body constantly die and get replaced by newly born cells, building materials are required to build those new baby cells from, to give birth to them. So our bodies require large amounts of cholesterol all the time for that process, and saturated fats as well.
Det er så vigtigt, kolesterol, at alle kroppens celler er i stand til at producere det. Og hvis de ikke orker at producere alt det, de behøver, så sender de besked til leveren, og så sender leveren kolesterol til hjælp. Vi bruger kolesterolet til at bygge cellevægge, vi bruger dem til at lave hormoner, stresshormoner og kønshormoner. Der har vi kolesterolmolekyler, som vi ændrer en lille bitte smule, og så har vi straks et hormon, som er fuldstændig livsvigtigt for os.
It is the main defensive substance, but it in turn is converted into other protective substances, the first of which are pregnenolone and progesterone, and also DHEA, another basic protective steroid.
Vi bruger også kolesterolmolekyler til at lave D-vitamin. Ved hjælp af solens stråler, så forvandles kolesterolmolekylerne til D-vitamin. Det er forstadium til galdesyre. Galdesyre kan vi ikke undvære, fordi hvis vi ikke producerede galde, så kunne vi jo ikke, for eksempel ikke optage de fedtopløselige vitaminer. Så spiser vi for lidt kolesterol, jamen så øger leveren sin produktion af kolesterol, og spiser vi meget kolesterol, jamen så tager vi leveren en lille pause og slapper af.
Nå har i hvert fall faktisk til med det etablerte fagmiljøet skiftet i sitt syn. Vi klarer ikke å spise nok kolesterol gjennom maten. Så 2/3 av det kolesterolet vi har er faktisk egenprodusert. Ja, leveren produserer kolesterol. Vi får ikke i oss nok kolesterol.
When we have any wound, any scratch, any wound, any trauma in the body, your blood cholesterol will be high. Why? Because no healing in the body can happen without involvement of cholesterol. In order to heal any wound, new cells have to be born. In order for them to be born, membranes need to be formed. And those membranes are largely cholesterol and saturated fat. So every time you had surgery, every time you went to a dentist, every time you hurt yourself, your blood cholesterol will be high. Because your liver is working hard to manufacture this healing substance. It puts it in the blood, and the blood delivers it to the place that is hurt, to the place that needs healing. After cholesterol has done its jobs in that place, it's taken back to the liver to be recycled. And the shuttle that does that is called HDL, high-density lipoprotein. Our clever science, in its wisdom, called the LDL the bad cholesterol, the HDL the good cholesterol. It's the same as to say that the ambulance, which goes from the base to the patient, is the good ambulance, and the one that takes goes from the patient back to the base is the bad ambulance. It's that kind of analogy, or vice versa. That cholesterol just travels back to the liver to be recycled, and the other cholesterol goes to the place to be used. So they cannot be good or bad.
Så er der endnu et tungt bevis, og det er en amerikansk forsker, der hedder Ronald Krauss, som kom med. Han fandt ud af, at der fandt flere forskellige slags LDL, altså det, man kalder det onde kolesterol. Der findes flere slags. Der er nogle, der er store og lette partikler, og en anden, der er nogle, der er små og kompakte af de her LDL-partikler. Og han viste så, at for det første, at det var de små, kompakte partikler, som man kunne bruge til at forudsige risikoen for hjerteinfarkt. Dem, der har mange af de små, kompakte LDL-partikler, de har en større risiko for at få hjerteinfarkt. Jeg siger ikke, at det er årsagen, læg mærke til det, men det er sådan en indikator, en markør for, at her er der en større risiko. Dem, der har flest af de store og lette LDL-partikler, har den mindste risiko for at få det. Han viste, at hvis man mindskede på kulhydraterne og øgede forbruget af mættet fedt, så mindskede antallet af de små tætte partikler, og de store lette partiklers antal øgede. Altså lige det modsatte af, hvad man skulle forvente sig. Det viste han allerede en gang i 80'erne. Han havde forsøgt at publicere det her i 3-4 år, fortalte han mig. Men det kom frem til sidst. Nu er Ronald Krauss ikke hvem som helst. Han sidder i det amerikanske råd, som giver kostråd til den amerikanske befolkning. Han har til og med været ordstyrer i den her forsamling. Og jeg mødte ham i Chicago for et par år siden, og så spurgte jeg, hør, sig mig lige en gang, hvordan kan det være, at I bliver ved med at advare mod det mættede fedt, når dine studier har jo på den mest afgørende måde vist, at mættet fedt er ufarligt. Jo, siger du, vi er jo ikke enige i gruppen, og når vi er uenige, så afgør vi spørgsmålet ved håndsoprækning.
Right, what is atherosclerosis? We now know, a plethora of scientific studies have shown that it is an inflammatory condition. It's inflammation through and through. Let's have a look at it. What happens with atherosclerosis? All our blood vessels and inside our heart are lined by a layer of cells called endothelium. Inside your heart, inside your arteries, inside your capillaries, your veins, it's all endothelium. It's an amazing organ, endothelium. It produces hormones and it decides what should come from the blood into the tissues and what shouldn't. Anything toxic that gets into your body, whether it's a virus, a bacterium, a chemical, mercury, lead, anything else, sooner or later finishes up in your bloodstream. Because that's your motorway system in the body, your blood. It carries things around. And when these things finish up in your blood, what are they going to do? They're going to attack. They attack your endothelium. They cause a wound in the endothelium, a damage in it. When there is any wound in the body, the first thing that happens, that place starts producing substances called cytokines and eicosanoids, which run through the liver and say, ding, 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 need cholesterol, need saturated fat. There's an injury, I need to heal it. So the liver switches on that factory, manufactures cholesterol, manufactures saturated fatty acids, packages them into LDLs and other shuttles, and sends them to that place to heal them, to heal the wound. How does healing happen in the human body with any wound? Whether you scratched your skin, whether you bit your tongue, or anything else happened to you, or you had surgery, so your tissues were cut. There are two partners in healing in the body. One is inflammation, the second one is repair. So when there is any injury, the body switches on inflammation first. What is inflammation? The immune system comes there, immune cells, they're like an army, like soldiers in an army. They kill the enemy and they clean away the debris. They clean the site. That's what inflammation does. It will destroy the virus, destroy the bacterium, or neutralize those chemicals that cause the wound inside your artery, and then clean the place up, remove all the debris. Because the immune cells, macrophages, they swallow the debris. They gobble them up inside themselves, and then they move away. They remove all this debris. They leave the place clean. Once the place is clean, the second partner comes in called repair. What does repair do? Repair, first and foremost, grows collagen. Remember, your body is made out of collagen to a large degree. This is the molecules that hold us together. It will grow collagen, a network of collagen, like a network of wires across that wound to seal it, like a bandage across that wound to seal it. And at the same time, this process starts giving birth to new cells of endothelium to repair that place. And these cells then hold themselves onto the collagen fibers, onto that network of fibers in there. And before you know it, a few hours, that wound is healed, as if nothing has happened in your artery. This is a natural process, and this process begins in the fetus, before the baby even born. Because even in the fetus, as soon as their vascular system is formed, their little heart is formed, and the arteries are formed inside the baby, inside the womb, poisons and toxins from the mother start getting into that blood and start causing injury to the endothelium. So this process begins even then, and it goes on in all of us, all of our life. Inflammation, repair, an hour maximum, couple of hours, the place is healed as if nothing happened in your artery at all. It's a beautiful process, and this process worked for us for hundreds of millions of years, perfectly well, until we invented something to stop that process. So what is an atherosclerosis? It's an inflammation out of control. What we human beings have invented? We invented processed carbohydrates. We invented things made out of sugar, flour, soya flour, and vegetable oils.
70% of American children's diet is now ultra-processed, which means industrial manufactured in a factory. These foods consist primarily of processed sugar, ultra-processed grain, and seed oils.
We have poisoned our food supply, engineered highly addictive chemicals that we put into our food. We spray it with pesticides that kill pests. What do you think they do to our gut lining and our microbiome? And then they come in sick. The GI tract is reacting. It's not an acute inflammatory storm. It's a low-grade chronic inflammation. And that inflammation permeates and drives so many of our chronic diseases that we didn't see half a century ago.
Ultimately leading to inflammation, it can either be, we can have an inflammatory reaction directly to the things that are coming into our body, again, which is mostly our diet, but also toxins and other things in our environment. In the standard American diet, with a lot of sugar and a lot of simple carbs, that our blood glucose level is too high too much of the time. So you have this excess amount of glucose, and what that does, the glucose can stick to proteins throughout the body. It can stick to the walls of the blood vessels. It can stick to all different sorts of proteins, but including in the brain. it makes those proteins not work properly, and then it also marks them out for to be cleaned up and removed by the immune system. But if that is happening on too big of a scale, then you have this constant inflammation going on, and the same collateral damage that you might experience when you had a bad cold. Maybe not as intensely, but smoldering there in the background. So that's kind of one category of our diet and how that affects inflammation. Another one would be seed oils, so canola oil, soybean oil, cottonseed oil, oils made from seeds that require a factory and a team of chemical engineers to turn this seed into an oil. They're very pro-inflammatory based on the types of fats that they are made out of, and also different byproducts in there that are in them. So ultra-processed food, you open up a package of cookies and it's full of sugar, it's full of carbs, simple carbs, and it's full of seed oils. You can imagine that that's going to drive inflammation.
Let's introduce you to the real cause of heart disease epidemic in the Western world, in the so-called civilized world. It isn't cholesterol, it isn't fats. It is metabolic syndrome.
Metabolic dysfunction is a fundamental distortion of our cellular biology. It stops our cells from making energy appropriately. According to the American College of Cardiology, metabolic dysfunction now affects 93.2% of American adults. This process is the result of 3 processes happening inside our cells: mitochondrial dysfunction, a process called oxidative stress, which is like a wildfire inside our cells, and chronic inflammation throughout the body and the gut, as we've heard about.
And that is the basis, now we know, with our recent scientific studies, that is the basis for formation of cancer. Cancer is an inflammation. Formation of mental illness, these people are in pro-inflammatory state, diabetes, obesity, and all the other degenerative diseases, pro-inflammatory state. Majority of the Western population are constantly in a pro-inflammatory state because of what they're eating.
From the research that I've done over the last 12 years particularly, the evidence leads me to believe that the seed oils, the highly polyunsaturated vegetable oils, are driving probably 90% of obesity and chronic disease across the board. Seed oils are the oils derived almost exclusively from seeds that mostly would have been waste products and or beans, in this case soybeans. So I've broken them down into the seed oils, and that would be oils like soybean, corn, canola, cottonseed, rapeseed, grapeseed, sunflower, safflower, rice bran, sesame, and peanut oils.
100 years ago, there was almost no chronic disease. Physicians knew what these diseases were and had written about them, and there were textbooks on them, but they were not observing them. There was virtually no obesity. Obesity was almost non-existent. There was almost zero diabetes. Now these are all at epidemic proportions in America.
And between 1865, when our consumption was 0 in the United States, and it was less than 0.1 grams of vegetable oils per person per day in 1865, grew all the way to 65 grams per person per day by 2014 globally.
The average American consumes 3 to 5 tablespoons of seed oils per day, and it's in almost all ultra-processed foods. Salad dressings, it's in cookies, it's in cakes, it's in crackers, it's in breads, it's in plant milks. To consume the equivalent of 3 to 5 tablespoons of corn oil, we would have to eat 60 to 70 ears of corn. To consume the equivalent of 3 to 5 tablespoons of soybean oil, we're looking at more than 2 pounds of soybeans. Amounts that we would never, ever have encountered historically as humans. So what we have here is a very striking discordance between what we have done for hundreds of thousands of years and what we're eating today in our diets. Incredibly evolutionarily inconsistent consumption of seed oils, which are just easy to consume today.
They're being recommended by our public health authorities in ever increasing amounts. This is a huge increase in a novel food item made out of a factory that never existed before.
And with that has come this explosion of overweight, obesity, and chronic disease. That makes seed oil consumption the single greatest change to the diet of mankind in all of history.
To understand seed oils, you have to understand they're all what's called omega-6 polyunsaturated oils.
These seed oil components, the omega-6 linoleic acid, accumulates in our bodies. It accumulates in our fat, it accumulates in our cell membranes, and this sets up this environment that is pro-oxidative, pro-inflammatory, toxic, and nutrient deficient.
When you eat these oils and these oxidized oils, they enter into your body, they're absorbed into your blood, they actually pass through the blood-brain barrier, and they drive inflammation in your body. Inflammation is known to drive heart disease. Inflammation is known to drive stress all over the body. It's known to cause cell death.
Something about these ultra-processed foods seems to be almost poisoning our metabolism, leading to more of this caloric energy being stored. To me, this looks like evidence that we are being poisoned.
Many people know that arsenic, for example, is a very damaging molecule. It's very dangerous poison, and it's dangerous because it's a pro-oxidant. And if the dose is high enough, it'll kill you very fast. But if the dose is really low, then it behaves just like vegetable oils. They're both pro-oxidative. So arsenic kills us through oxidation. Vegetable oils ultimately maim and kill us mostly through oxidation.
This is the picture of the atherosclerotic plaque. That is where the blood flows. That is the middle of the artery. You see how narrow it becomes? And that is the plaque. You see on top of this plaque, we have the bandage. That is collagen that repair system has built to separate this rubbish tip, this rubbish pile, from the bloodstream. And that's the rubbish pile. You see, full of damaged cells, broken down collagen, broken down immune cells, foam cells, and broken down cholesterol and fat. That's what it is. Fats and cholesterol in the plaque are not the real cholesterol and real fat that is in an egg yolk and in butter. They are chemically mutilated, damaged molecules. They are damaged by the immune system, by the inflammation. In order to repair the tissue, the blood will keep bringing these molecules into that area, but the inflammation attacks them immediately with free radicals, because immune cells use free radicals as guns and bullets to fight the enemy. They damage this cholesterol, they damage these fats, and they become useless. The body cannot use them. So they just dumped in the middle of that rubbish pile inside your arterial wall.
Oxidized LDL directly contributes to atherosclerosis development and progression because it directly damages the endothelial cells. So the endothelial cells, we come back here, is this nice little layer that sits on the inside of the artery and controls the relaxation and dilation of the artery and a variety of different processes, some of the clotting cascade and things like this. Essentially what happens is you have normal LDL here, it's fine. But when the ox-LDL interacts with the endothelial cells and induces endothelial dysfunction, they also signal the LOX1 receptor, and you get the monocytes come in, and they start to eat up the oxidized LDL, and you get foam cell formation, and this is inside the artery. Normal LDL just takes the fats from your liver and brings them to your tissues. Oxidized LDL, that's where we see vascular damage and immune activation, which is directly involved in the atherosclerotic process. And then we can also see this here in humans Basically, in people who have heart disease, ox-LDL is higher. So this is from Dr. James D. Nicolantonio's paper. They say ox-LDL was found to be higher in patients with coronary artery disease compared with normal patients. And ox-LDL was able to better identify patients at an elevated risk of heart disease. So basically, the more atherosclerosis you see somebody have, or both relationships, you basically see more oxidized LDL, and the more oxidized LDL a person has, and also antibodies to the ox-LDL, you tend to see increased atherosclerosis. So you're seeing this relationship between oxidized LDL particles and an atherosclerotic lesions in people's arteries.
Yeah, that's brilliant, Mike. I just want to ask next then, so if it's oxidized LDL that's driving atherosclerosis, driving coronary heart disease, coronary artery disease, cardiovascular disease, all of those, what is it that's the primary driver or drivers of oxidation of LDL?
So I guess when we talk about this, you know this as well as I do, but essentially you have some component that allows LDL to be oxidized, and then you have components that are inducing that oxidation process, right? So you can have inflammatory responses, metabolic dysfunction, exposure to chemical agents and stuff like this. They induce oxidative stress. But the question is then how susceptible is that LDL particle to that oxidative stress? And one of the big components that determines susceptibility is going to be the types of fats present inside the LDL particle, the linoleic acid specifically, and polyunsaturated fatty acids in general, but linoleic acid, particularly high omega-6 linoleic acid from seed oils, can increase the susceptibility of the LDL particles to oxidation, to being oxidized.
Let's look at this ulcer. What's in it? A third stage atherosclerotic plaque. 74% of all fats in the core are unsaturated. Where do they come from? Not from your butter. They came from vegetable oils, from your margarine and your butter replacements, and all the processed foods you ate, which are full of these things. Your crisps, your chips, and other things fried in vegetable oil.
If that cholesterol undergoes a chemical process called oxidation, it is more likely to then get lodged in the arteries and start a plaque buildup. And oxidation of cholesterol happens when you have high sugar content in your diet, and also when you have high seed oils in your diet as well. So seed oils, oils that are made out of soybean, canola oil, vegetable oil, corn oil, and a few others. Those are very inflammatory, and they also lead towards a bad cholesterol profile and a higher risk for plaque buildup. So high carbs, high sugar, seed and vegetable oils are the problem.
Hvorfor får vi ikke rede på at mye av den maten vi får ferdiglaget inneholder en rekke komponenter som bidrar til å øke risikoen for betennelser i tarmen? At plantemargarin så bra, for det inneholder polymettede plantefettsyrer som sunt. Og så får du bilde av solsikke. Og alle som ser en bilde av en solsikke på en åker en sommerdag, tenker det ingenting sunnere enn det. Men solsikkeoljen, den inneholder mest av alt den type fettsyrer som heter N6-fettsyrer. Som menneskeheten, den største forandringen i kostholdet i det siste generasjonen at vi har fått mer og mer innhold av såkalt N6-fettsyrer som stimulerer, altså som øker risikoen for inflammasjon, fordi den inflammatorisk. Den balanseres i naturen av omega-3-fettsyrene som du får fra for eksempel marine fettsyrer, men også noen marine plante-omega-3-fettsyrer. Det en balanse der. Balansen skal ligge innen visse grenser. Og den grensen sprengt for lengst. Vi har nå et forholdstall med innhold av N6-fettsyrer som 10-20 ganger høyere enn det har vært tradisjonelt. Mennesker har aldri fått i seg så mye.
Hvorfor står ikke det på pakningene? Hvis du går inn på et supermarked og ser på forpakningene, står det hvor mye N6-fettsyre det er der? Nei. Hvorfor underslår en det? Hvorfor vil en ikke... Vel, disse fettsyrene som en ikke snakker så høyt om, de brukes fordi de er billige. Det andre er at de ikke harskner så fort. Og skal du lage et produkt som ikke lukter harsk fisk og den slags, så er det greit å bruke omega-6-fettsyre i stedet for omega-3. Eller mettet fett.
Seed oils are absolutely not natural. They're not a food of nature. Seed oils are the single most processed food on the planet, bar none.
Seeds, nuts, beans can only be made into an oil in a factory. It needs to go through so many industrial steps in order to create the oil.
The actual process of making these oils heats them to 500 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they must be deodorized at the end of that because the process of heating the oils to 500 degrees inevitably causes them to become rancid, oxidized, or rusted in the colloquial sense.
So no one would eat seed oils. They would run from them if they smelled them before the deodorization process.
Cottonseed oil had originally been used as a lubricant for machinery in the Industrial Revolution. After we had hunted all the whales out of the ocean, we hunted the whales mainly for their fat. When we lost that source of fat, it had to be replaced. Cottonseed oil came in to fill that need for all kinds of machinery, for making candles and soaps, and that was it. Then Procter & Gamble came along and said, let's try to sell this as a foodstuff. So in 1911, they sold it as an ersatz, a fake lard, and they called it Crisco. Crisco was the first time anywhere in the history of the world that vegetable oils were marketed as a food item to be consumed by humans.
Butter and lard and even tallow began to be replaced and supplanted. And this is what took off in the 20th century.
The story of Crisco that was published in 1913, so 2 years after Crisco was launched, and it says, and so the nation's cookbook has been hauled out and is being revised. Upon thousands of pages, the word lard and butter have been crossed out and the word Crisco written in their place. It was the earnest aim of the makers of Crisco to produce a strictly vegetable product without adding a hard and consequently indigestible animal fat. So pretending that animal fats are indigestible even though we've been consuming them since the beginning of humanity, and that somehow this new product was more digestible. Okay, well, this is a book that was written by the former vice president of the American Heart Association, and I just could not believe my luck when I came across this. Before Procter & Gamble stepped in, it's really clear that the American Heart Association is struggling as an organization that doesn't have much power or many funds. So this is a chapter, starts from 1946. There is little doubt that the cardiologists, the scientists, and local groups involved with the American Heart Association were extremely frustrated. Their inability to deal with disease, but also their inability to get anybody's attention. They just literally could not be an actor on the national stage. And then not long after that comes this event where Procter & Gamble steps in and really gives them the funds that they need to become a national organization. At a luncheon on April 14th, 1948, at the Stevens Hotel in Chicago, the president of the AHA was presented a check by representatives of Procter & Gamble. Suddenly, the coffers were filled, and there were funds available for research, public health programs, blah, 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 all the stuff that dreams are made of. In the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the American Heart Association was a sleepy little organization because cardiologists were relatively rare, as heart disease was relatively rare back then. And then in 1948, In comes Procter & Gamble.
And they literally infused $1.7 million into the American Heart Association, which was this little tiny organization. $1.7 million is the equivalent of $20 million today. So the American Heart Association became a huge organization overnight.
American housewives had shifted over to seed oils because they were cheaper. Margarine was cheaper than butter. Seed oils were cheaper than any kind of animal fat for cooking. There was an economic incentive. But now there was a medical incentive.
News that the president had suffered a heart attack was flashed to the world on September 24th, 1955.
In 1955, President Eisenhower had a heart attack.
America was plagued with uncertainty.
The attention of the nation was 100% focused on President Eisenhower and what caused heart disease. Nobody knew. The public was desperate for answers. Here was the #1 killer of the nation, felling men in the prime of life, and really, people had no idea about how to protect themselves. So into this vacuum steps Ansel Keys.
I, Dr. Ansel Keys, am a physiologist. My specialty is diet and health.
Ansel Keys believed that saturated fat and cholesterol caused heart disease because they would raise your blood cholesterol, and like hot oil down a cold stovepipe would gradually shrink your arteries until you had a heart attack. That was called the diet heart hypothesis. Ansel Keys got onto the Nutrition Committee of the American Heart Association in 1960, and in 1961, 1 year later, even though there was no additional new science, the American Heart Association endorsed his view and adopted Ansel Keys's hypothesis.
From the beginning of the production, sale, distribution of vegetable oils, it was never about health. They promoted vegetable oils as healthy, but it was never about health. It was always about profit.
In fact, at the time, there was hardly any evidence for Ansel Keys's idea that saturated fat and cholesterol cause heart disease. There was a large study called the 7-country study on nearly 13,000 men.
I am presently engaged in a major experiment involving the health and eating habits of some 10,000 individuals scattered throughout the world.
Looking at their diets and following them over time to see who died of heart attacks or any other cause of death. What were some of the problems with that study? He went to countries like Yugoslavia, Greece, Italy, that had been ravaged by World War II when he visited them.
We are collecting data on all types, from African tribesmen to American businessmen.
And he avoided countries like Switzerland, France, Germany, sausage eaters, omelet eaters, high saturated fat diets, who also had really low rates of heart disease. He cherry-picked his countries to get the desired results that he wanted.
I think there were so many things that all came together at the right times to create an atmosphere of belief in this hypothesis that animal fats and saturated animal fat were the enemy.
Seed oils do lower your cholesterol on your total and your LDL cholesterol. In large clinical trials, the most rigorous kind of evidence on 76,000 people, lowering your LDL cholesterol by consuming seed oils has never been shown to have any benefit for death from heart disease or death from any cause.
What we have in Western medicine is this propensity to look at all of the data together without looking at carefully how good every individual study is. When there are multiple studies on a topic and the results of those studies are conflicting, what we tend to do in Western medicine is zoom out when we should be zooming in to look at the quality of every individual study.
Just to give you a sense of how early warning signs on seed oils were ignored, in 1956, there was a trial on corn oil by somebody named G.A. Rose. They fed 19 teaspoons of corn oil to subjects, and they followed them for 3 years compared to a control group. At the end of 2 years, they stopped the experiment early because people having corn oil were dying at such higher rates. At the end of the experiment, the researchers wrote, "We have to recognize that clinical trials are not always to the benefit of the patients, and we cannot recommend vegetable oils to fight heart disease, and they are possibly harmful." There should have been no experiments since then. There should have been game over for seed oils. In the early 1980s, when clinical trials, again, high-level evidence began to show that feeding people seed oils caused cancer, especially colon cancer. This was in a dozen clinical trials this result came out. The National Institutes of Health had a series of very high-level meetings, including the top scientists of the day, trying to explain why were people dying from cancer from seed oil diets. I mean, they had a number of explanations, but nobody was satisfied by them. And ultimately they decided, well, reducing cholesterol was just so important that they would just ignore the cancer results. And then there were other results in conferences that came out, animal experiments showing cirrhosis of the liver from seed oils. There were results about toxic oxidation products. What concerns me most is that this science is not unknown. It has just been silenced.
So what we need is a new study. We need new studies. Who will fund this? Why would anyone fund this? The majority of funding for medical studies comes from private industry, namely pharmaceutical companies. No pharmaceutical company will ever fund a study looking at saturated fat versus seed oils today. So we're kind of stuck looking at antiquated data and doing the best we can. I believe very strongly that if we look at this data, even though it's poorly done carefully, it still, to me, strongly suggests that seed oils are very problematic for human health.
So I'm frustrated by our food supply because it's making us sick and people are not aware of it. They're completely unaware that the food choices they make today can cause their illness and even their death tomorrow.
We're hearing a lot about seed oils. Why should people be worried about these kind of products?
Seed oils are one of the most unhealthy ingredients that we have in foods. And seed oils, the reason they're in the foods is because they're heavily subsidized. They're very, very cheap, but they are associated with all kinds of very, very serious illnesses, including body-wide inflammation.
Right.
Which affects all of our health. It's one of the worst things you can eat, and it's almost impossible to avoid. If you eat any processed food, you're going to be eating seed oil.
Right, and it's interesting the government subsidizes it. Why would the government want to subsidize something that's going to make people sick, and then in the end, we all end up paying for that in terms of healthcare costs, which are skyrocketing?
Yeah, because that is a direct result of corruption. About 75% of FDA's budget comes from regulated industry, and that means food processors and pharmaceutical industry. All of them profit from a sick population.
They are unhealthy because they deteriorate in our body in ways that promote inflammation, that promote DNA damage, mitochondrial damage, and are associated, that kind of damage is associated with every disease.
The seed oils were already seen to be toxic, cause sterility, degeneration of the brain and the gonads and so on. Probably from 1925, but especially in the 1930s and 40s, the very oxidizable seed oils were known to be toxic, and that was one of the factors in researching vitamin E as something to counteract the toxicity of the seed oils, unsaturated fats.
We had scientific studies from 1930s to demonstrate that vegetable oils cause heart disease, cancer, infertility, psychiatric illness, learning disabilities in children, and diabetes and every other disease. They cause it. Why? Because they're made out of very fragile polyunsaturated fatty acids. They are easily damaged by light, oxygen, and heat. That is why Mother Nature wisely locked these fats within the structure of plants. The lettuce leaves, the apples, nuts, oily seeds, and other plants. When we eat these plants in their fresh form, we get all of these polyunsaturated fatty acids in the right amount and in the right biochemical shape and form, and they're good for us. But what do? We take all that plant matter to our big factories, we chop it up, and we subject them to high heat, to oxygen, to chemical solvents, to pressure, to all sorts of things. So all of these fragile polyunsaturated fatty acids get mutilated. They are chemically mutilated molecules which have no place in the human body. This is pollution, poisonous pollution coming into your body.
Og når du varmer den olje opp til 200-300 grader, som de ofte gjør når du steker, ikke sant? Så vil det umette fettet lett reagere. Det kan danne transfett, men det kan også danne sånne akrylamid og den typen forbindelser som man har mistanke om kan bidra til til kreft for eksempel.
Men hvis du koker opp visse planteoljer for høy varme, så skjer disse reaksjonene her?
Ja.
These are just some of the toxic oxidation products that are in heated oils and the kinds of effects that they have. Aldehydes, one of the aldehydes is a formal marker for your cancer, for cancer risk. And aldehydes are created, are just created in huge amounts when they fry food in polyunsaturated oils. And there was a woman who did an experiment where she just went to her local McDonald's and started, just measuring the aldehydes in the fried chicken nuggets and the French fries, and she found hundreds of all kinds of oxidation products, but very high levels of these aldehydes.
De fetttypene som finnes I rapsolje oksiderer mye lettere, og høy temperatur vil påvirke hvorvidt slike fettstoffer oksiderer.
Og det usunt for oss da, eller?
Ja, oksidert fett jo ikke bra, og det kan du til dels også smake, for det den der ekle, litt harske smak. Hvis du har I hvert fall veldig sånn fintunet smakssystem, så plukker du opp sånn harsk smak. Og det jo ikke godt, og jeg tror også at vi har en evne til å smake den der harske av en grunn. Det jo ikke, vi vet jo at det ikke bra for oss, så det spørsmålet hvor farlig det hvis du steker en biff liksom. Jeg tror ikke det har så mye å si, men gjennom et langt liv da, og gjør mye av det med oljer som oksiderer mye, så tror jeg at det ikke så veldig bra.
Men det type på de liksom bad boyene innenfor planteoljer, sånn soya, mais, solsikke?
Nei, altså det har med fettsyresammensetning å gjøre. Altså fiskolje vil jeg ikke anbefale, altså tran, vil ikke anbefale tran. Av mange grunner egentlig, men også fordi at det vil også være et veldig reaktivt fett. Det jo derfor tran har så lav holdbarhet, og det reagerer veldig, det reagerer lett. Det kjemisk reaktivt, det umette fettet. Så det jo en av grunnene til at det liksom en av argumentene mot at vi skal ha så mye av dette flerumette fettet, at det med oksiderer lettere også.
Well, why is linoleic acid or omega-6 fats, like what makes them so problematic, right? Because, okay, so they oxidize, but why do they oxidize more than monounsaturated and saturated fats? And basically it's a structural problem. It's essentially a structural problem. So when we look at the different fats, you have saturated fats which have no double bonds. Then you have monounsaturated fats which have this singular double bond. And you have polyunsaturated fats, this is linoleic acid, that has 2 double bonds. The more double bonds that you have in these fatty acid tails, the more likely they are to be damaged or interact with the components that can create a strong oxidative reaction.
The evidence is clear that it's extremely difficult to oxidize saturated fat. It's almost impossible. One lipid biochemist in a paper that I read said, if you want, and this is his word, he wrote, wish I could notate the paper, but he said, if you want to oxidize saturated fat, throw it in a can of gasoline and light it on fire, because that's the only way to oxidize it. Whereas I know you're getting to these polyunsaturated fats, they oxidize relatively extremely easily.
The number of unsaturations in the fatty acid, which is highest in fish oils, for example, that number corresponds with its ability to suppress the thyroid hormone function. In the 1940s, lab animals were dying of various symptoms, including infertility and softening of the brain. And it was found that it was because they were adding these unsaturated vegetable oils to their feed, blocking their thyroid function and preventing them from using the protective cholesterol. Agriculture took advantage of the anti-thyroid effect of these vegetable oils to use them to fatten animals economically.
So instead of pigs being fed the compost, they were then fed corn and soy, and their fat then represented a large amount of these vegetable oils.
Yeah, it was common to use waste food like spoiling apples and vegetables and whey from the cheese factories and so on. But when they learned that they could fatten the pigs on much less food if it contained these unsaturated oils, that became the basic industrial animal food. So you wouldn't want to eat mainly pork and poultry and fish because those are anti-thyroid.
There exist on the earth populations of humans that do not suffer the same decline in health that we are as westernized humans. And that discordance, that striking difference, I think is something that we should not ignore. That there are thousands of humans who do not suffer chronic illness in general at all. That begs a very, very profound question. What are they doing differently than us?
Ancestral diets are made of whole, natural foods. Foods that don't come with labels, don't come with ingredient labels. They're not boxed, packaged, canned. They're foods that you have to make yourself. If you think about the Maasai warriors of Kenya and Tanzania, they were studied by George Mann back in 1972. Their diet is milk, meat, and blood, and it's 66% animal fat. It's the highest animal fat diet in the world. That's 40 to 46% saturated animal fat, and yet virtually no heart disease. Another example might be the Tokelauans of the South Pacific. Their diet, extremely different. It's made up of coconut, fish, starchy tubers, and fruit. Their diet was 50% saturated fat. But did they have heart disease? No, they had absolutely none. They had no heart disease, they had no diabetes, they had no obesity. The natural level of omega-6 linoleic acid in the body fat of people on an ancestral diet is about 2.8%. But Americans already had omega-6 LA in their body fat of 9.1% by 1959, and that increased to 21.5% by 2008. But you can see that there's all kinds of diets around the world with all sorts of different macronutrient ratios, the ratios of proteins, fats to carbs, and it makes no difference what those are for the most part, as long as your diet is made up of ancestral ingredients. You can be all over the board with those ratios and still be healthy.
how can we be getting hundreds and hundreds of calories a day from seed oils? This is how. Things like bread that we don't even expect to have seed oils. But this bread has over 25 ingredients and seed oils. This includes soybean oil in this bread, something we wouldn't expect to be in a bread. Here's a chip. You're in the sun, you're eating chips. This is a healthy chip. It's a whole grain chip. It's heart healthy on the label. The second ingredient on the label is sunflower oil or canola oil. But there's evidence from many studies to suggest that ultra-processed foods like this don't satiate us. They don't quell our hunger in the same way that unprocessed animal and plant foods might, an apple, a banana. Whereas this type of food we know is going to cause us to be hungrier sooner and to eat more food throughout the day. There's actually studies in humans suggesting that when we give humans linoleic acid-rich oils like seed oils, we have higher levels of hunger hormones. This looks like a very healthy food. It's a dressing, it's a ranch dressing, right? It's gonna go on my healthy salad. But again, this is an ultra-processed food. We wouldn't expect it to be, but it's an ultra-processed food. The first ingredient on this label is not water, it's soybean or canola oil. The majority of what is in this container is a seed oil. So another thing that we might think of as a healthier option is a plant-based milk. This oat milk contains canola oil. On the label here it says low erucic acid rapeseed oil. I'm not sure if Oatly is trying to disguise the fact that it contains a seed oil, but they say low erucic acid rapeseed oil. So we have here an ultra-processed food. We have a food that your grandmother would never recognize. It starts with oats and water, to which they add seed oils, and they add multiple synthetic vitamins so that the nutrition label actually looks good. Because if the nutrition label doesn't have any nutrients, why would anyone drink this plant milk? So I think that reading labels is enlightening for us. And even foods that we would think of as simple often contain hidden ingredients, contain far more ingredients than we expect, and often contain seed oils.
The ideal diet, in my view, is one that is rich in natural animal foods. So we're talking fish, seafood, eggs, dairy, cheese, meat. Any of those foods contain all the nutrients, the vitamins and minerals in a form that are the most easily digestible.
Today, we should think of ourselves as hunters and gatherers, and we should be careful about where we hunt. And we should educate ourselves by reading labels and understanding that not everything we pick up in a grocery store, even if it claims to be a healthy grocery store, is going to support health in us as humans.
3 steps you can take to improve your diet right away. First of all, try to avoid those central aisles of the supermarket with the packages and all that processed or ultra-processed food.
We simply shop around the outside of the grocery store and we focus on unprocessed animal foods. We will do better. We will do very good as humans. If we venture into the dangerous hunting grounds and we go to the center of the grocery store, we will inevitably fill our carts with ultra-processed foods, sometimes without knowing it. Foods like salad dressings or cookies or cakes or crackers or plant milks that are full of seed oils and that are full of other ingredients that are probably contributing to ill human health.
Second step, get rid of seed oils in your home. Canola oil, Wesson oil, safflower, sunflower, just throw those out and replace them with butter, ghee, coconut oil is a good one. Try that out.
You need to use an oil. I would stick with coconut oil, it's 2% omega-6 LA, or olive oil. And you need to be careful with olive oil because so much of it, around 79% of it in the United States, is not good quality and or is adulterated with cheap other types of oils like soybean oil and canola oil.
If people want to include olive or avocado oil in their diet, if you can find an organic, single source, cold pressed, in an opaque glass container, you might use that in a healthful way on a salad, but I would not heat those oils. The best thing for us is to use the animal fats as much as we can. And I believe that saturated fat-rich oils are the healthiest oils for humans. But saturated fat has been vilified. But I think if we look at the research carefully, saturated fat is not harmful for humans and actually has many healthful roles in the human body. So do not fear saturated fat for humans.
Number 3, when you go out, probably don't order fried food, I'm afraid to say. It's all fried in soybean oil, and that is a lot of oxidation products that you are then getting in your food and absorbing in your body. So those 3 things, not so hard actually, will vastly reduce the amount of seed oils in your diet.
Never ever buy these oils, never cook on them. And there is a big risk in eating out, because all our food in restaurants, takeaway meals and everywhere else are cooked with these poisonous oils. And margarine is made out of these oils. Your spreadable butter is made out of these oils. All your spreadable and other butter replacements are made out of these oils. Nobody should be eating them.
Margarin det mest omfattende prosesserte vi kan spise noensinne. Altså disse oljene som går inn I margarin, de jo ekstremt omfattende prosessert allerede før de blir margarin. Og så blir jo disse oljene satt sammen igjen til et omfattende prosessert industriprodukt som laget for å etterligne, det skal jo på en måte etterligne smør da, men uten å være smør. Og smør jo et lite prosessert produkt I forhold, veldig langt nede på den prosesseringsskalaen. Og jeg har etter hvert studert dette så nøye, lest så mye forskning og sett så mye på hva det som skiller disse her forskjellige gradene av prosessering, så jeg har egentlig blitt helt overbevist om at det å bruke prosesseringsgrad som rettesnor den beste måten å vurdere maten på. Så jeg anbefaler ingen å spise margarin, og ikke det godt heller.
Well, let me say what I advise to my patients when they ask me, what should I eat and stuff. And I don't necessarily advocate for one single particular diet. I say kind of 2 things. You've got to eat food that occurs in nature, for starters. And secondly, that food should be produced in the way that nature intended. So it does make a difference if your egg is coming from a free-range chicken that lives outside and eats grass and bugs and has sunlight on it versus one that lives in a barn with a million other chickens and is breathing all kinds of bad air and has got hormones and antibiotics and stuff like that, right? The same thing applies with your beef. So food from nature, produced in the way that nature intended, is a good start. It's a complicated thing. There's way more details, but that's kind of the rules of thumb that I give to my patients. So.
Yeah, I like that. It can be really hard, I feel like, change a mindset, especially on diet, especially when it's been around for years and years and years. But I think it's really cool, like you were saying, lots of people are way more interested in eating better and healthier. Yes. And like, there's a lot that goes into that, but I like that you gave us 2 simple things to remember. Food from nature, yeah, I like that. So hopefully you guys can apply that. I know he always gets me with the processed food. I'm working on it.
I felt it too.
Yeah, I'm working on it, doing my best. But trying to remember these things. So thank you for continuing to come on and give us so many great tips and facts to know also. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yes, of course.
Certainly there's an argument that the healthiest foods, the organic foods, they do cost a little bit more. There's no question. That little bit of investment that you make in your food choices now and your food expense now, which is a little bit higher, could save you 10 times, 100 times or more in the long run, because you will prevent all of these diseases. You will prevent your own disability. You will prevent your own premature death. What is that worth to you and to your family, maybe to your children, your grandchildren? Do we owe that to ourselves and to our families? I think so. It's an investment in yourself and in your family.
I think the one hopeful thing I can say to people, because the nutrition information landscape out there is so maddeningly confusing, you at least can experiment on your own body. And you are your own N=1 experiment. Try it out. Try for 3 weeks eliminating seed oils and see how you feel. Do your aches and pains go away? They do for a lot of people. Does the skin condition start to improve? It does for a lot of people. See if it works for you.
Our food supply is frustrating because it's nutrient deficient and it's toxic. And people need to understand this. Once they do, they can start making informed choices, because there are good foods and there are regeneratively raised foods from farmers and ranchers who truly care and want to provide great food to us.
If we just return to where we've come from and we think about what makes sense, if we use our intuition, it becomes clear that including large amounts of ultra-processed foods, ingredients that we would never have been exposed to, seed oils, which are a recent addition to the human diet, which are refined, bleached, deodorized, oxidized, and clearly are harmful and difficult for the human body to deal with, including lots of these things in our diet, despite what we may be told, is probably not a good idea.
The people of the year 1900, for example, they didn't know anything about nutrition. They'd never heard of vitamins. Vitamins hadn't even been theorized yet. Weren't concerned with low carb or low fat or keto or being a vegan or any of this for the most part. They just ate what was in the food supply. Yet they were lean, they were fit, they were healthy, they had no heart disease, they had basically no chronic disease, right? But they were just eating what was in the food supply. It was simple. Today, if you just eat what's in the food supply, you will get sick. That's a standard American diet. We know that's the one diet that absolutely will not work for anyone.
We're being told that seed oils are good for health and saturated fats are bad for health, when the opposite is true. I feel like truth is a form of justice, and when people aren't getting the truth, they're being ill-served, and it's not just that they're being lied to, it's that their health is suffering. They're losing their family, relatives, their kids are obese. I mean, it is information that is truly damaging our nation at every level.
I'll tell you this, when you remove vegetable oils, your risk of heart attack and stroke go down that day. That day.
Hi, Christina Peterson with Bloomberg. Both Secretary Kennedy and the FDA Commissioner mentioned saturated fats and evolving science on that. Could you expand a little bit on how your thinking has shifted, or how you believe the science has shifted?
Sure. Look, since Ancel Keys in the 1960s decided to demonize saturated fat with a hypothesis that was supported with data that was incomplete and methodologically flawed in his 7-country study, the medical establishment started with a robust debate in the New England Journal of Medicine among academics of the National Academy. But that debate ended in the 1970s because there was groupthink. The medical establishment locked arms and walked off a cliff together, insisting that the reason for heart disease in the United States was that people were not eating skim milk and no fat and low fat foods, ignoring the roles of refined carbohydrates and so many other things that drive general body inflammation, which is the precursor of fat deposition in the arteries. Well, that dogma still lives large, and you see remnants of it in the food guidelines that we are now revising. So we're going to ensure that the new guidelines are based on science and not medical dogma. Thank you for that question.